You guys know I'm all about being prepared. Today we're going to talk about water storage. We're going to give you lots of options and ideas for putting together emergency water storage for your family, including how you can do it virtually for free. We're Stephanie and Mike from sixfiguresunder.com, where we teach families to get out of debt, be intentional with money, and be prepared for whatever comes.
Like an interruption in your water supply.
If you've missed the other videos in our food storage series, I'll leave a link below and at the end of this video for you to check them out.
But first, really the question is, why is water so important? Don't we all just have it coming out of our faucets?
Yes, we're blessed to have clean water coming out of our faucet 99% of the time, but in times of natural disaster or a disruption or contamination in your water supply, having water is crucial to your family's survival and well-being. Water is even more important than food. You can live with a lot longer without food than you can without water.
And water storage comes in very useful even without a major disaster. When I was growing up, we lived in a rural area with well water, and every time the power went out, which was several times a year, or the well pump had problems, we were without water. And in our current house, where we've lived for about 3.5 years, there have been 4 different times when our city water supply has been compromised and we were advised to either not use water at all or to use it only for emergency and essential purposes. Each of those times was for a period of 24 to 48 hours. One of those times was even during one of those days-long power outages that PG&E had.
So here's the question. What would you do if you couldn't use your tap for 2 days? Are you prepared with an alternate water supply, or would you be one of those people running to the store, from store to store, hoping that someone still has water on the shelves? And by alternate water supply, I don't mean anything fancy. In those 4 instances where our tap was unavailable, we just used water that we bottled ourselves, that we keep stored in our pantry. It was easy to store, easy to use, and we had plenty of water until we could use our tap again.
Even more often though, we'll grab a gallon or 2 of stored water when we go on a trip in the car, or we go to the park or on a picnic. It's quick and convenient, and it's a great way to rotate our water storage, and it doesn't cost us anything at all.
So how much water should you store? Well, you can pretty easily store a few months or even a year of food. Storing that much water just isn't possible for most people. Water takes up a lot of space.
And if we aren't carefully monitoring our water usage, we can use a lot of water. Just go and check your last water bill to see how many gallons of water you used last month. It might freak you out just a little bit.
If you can't go look up your bill right now, I'll give you our numbers to give you some idea of the possible water usage for your family. We'll go back to the month of March because that was before we were watering our huge garden. In March, we used just over 23,000 gallons of water total. We're a family of 8, but we also have an Airbnb rental on our property that usually has 1 or 2 people in it. So if we divide this into a per person use with 10 people, we find that we used 76 gallons per person per day. That's crazy, isn't it?
Now, the standard recommendation for emergency water storage is to store a minimum of 1 gallon per person per day and store a minimum of 3 days supply. Going from 76 gallons per day to 1 gallon per day per user is pretty drastic. That would really just cover drinking and food prep and not much else. If you're also dealing with high temperatures or physical exertion or sickness or injury or cleaning, you'll definitely need more. So we're much more comfortable planning for a whole 2 gallons per person per day. That's a lot less than 76, but it does allow for some water for things like, washing up.
Let's say you have a family of 4 and you want to be prepared with 2 gallons per day per person for 3 days. You're looking at 4 people times 2 gallons times 3 days equals 24 gallons. For our family, we've decided we want more than a 3-day supply. We're aiming at a minimum of 2 weeks water supply. For us, that means at least 224 gallons. 8 people times 2 gallons per day times 14 days is 224 gallons.
So it's pretty easy to decide how much water you want to store. The next big question is, how on earth do you store 224 gallons of water? Now, we've been keeping a little water around since we were newlyweds. We started really simply with a few gallons for a 3-day supply, And only recently we've started getting a little more involved with our larger family and our longer supply.
I'll start with the one idea that's literally free. The cheapest, easiest way to store water is to recycle plastic juice and soda bottles.
We have lots of these.
We don't buy juice or soda very often, but whenever we do, we wash out the bottles and we refill them with water. There have even been a few times that I've bought juice just so that we could reuse the bottle for water storage. You can get 2 half-gallon bottles of apple juice for less than $2.50 from Walmart.com and get free delivery when you have a $35 order, which is easy to do. Just drink the juice, wash out the bottles, and refill them with water. Bam! You've got water storage.
So find somewhere in your house or your garage or a shed to store them. Put them under a bed or in a closet or in a really high cupboard in the kitchen that no one can reach without a step stool. Just find some place. There aren't very many things that will be as valuable to you as emergency food and water when you need them. It's worth making space for.
These reused juice bottles are super convenient for bringing water on a picnic or in the car or to grab and go in an emergency. During each of the 4 times when our tap water was unavailable, we've just used the water from these bottles. It's really convenient in the kitchen, easy to pour from. It's great.
But you don't have to have juice bottles. If you regularly use bottled water, just buy a few extra cases for emergency storage. That makes good sense. But pay attention to how much water you're actually storing because it takes quite a few small water bottles to equal a gallon of water.
We don't use this method for our family because we always just drink tap water. We just don't buy bottled water. In California especially, where we pay an extra deposit for each bottle, buying a lot of small water bottles seems wasteful and expensive, so we just don't do it.
But if you're already buying water bottles, it's pretty easy to buy a few extra cases and just keep them on hand for an emergency.
Now, if you're a canner like me, then at any given times you have dozens or hundreds of empty glass canning jars. The unused jars take up the same amount of space whether they're full or empty, so why not store water in them? When you have more produce from your garden to can, then you can easily empty the jars from water.
So here are a couple here. It's actually nice to have some plastic screw-on lids. Rather than using the normal metal flat lids and rings, you can use the lids and rings, the flat ones. But if you're like us, we don't have nearly as many rings as we have jars. So getting extra lids and rings isn't really that convenient, and a simple reusable plastic lid is nice. The metal rings can also rust sometimes if they're left in a jar and exposed to water or humidity for a long time.
And these plastic ones are great. They have the gasket in them so they don't leak or anything. I can leave a link for you for those. I love that this method doesn't require any extra storage space if you're already storing the jars. The water stays clean and safe, and it's really easy to rotate through as you use your jars to can.
If you want to store a larger amount of water than just a half gallon or so, you can also get really large water barrels that come in 55-gallon sizes frequently, and that's a really efficient use of space. You can sometimes find these used from restaurants or food suppliers. You just have to make sure they're food-grade plastic, that they were previously used for foods or beverages rather than some sort of chemical, and make sure that you can clean them out adequately. You can also buy these barrels new, specifically for water storage. If you're looking at that, we found the best deals to be from Sam's Club. We were actually planning to get some from there, but an older couple from church was moving out of state and asked us if we were interested in adopting their 55-gallon water drums and some other food storage items.
They had 4 of them.
Yeah. The barrels had been out on their shed for several years and they were pretty dirty, but we cleaned them up and they ended up just fine. It was a huge blessing for us.
It was a good job for the kids to get out there and clean them out. They had fun with it. When you store water in a 55-gallon drum, you'll need a way to use the water. Some barrels come with a bung and spigot installed, or you can retrofit one onto an existing barrel. If you don't have one, the simplest way to get water out is with a siphon made of a hose or plastic tubing, but a hand pump is also really convenient. You'll want to store the pump disconnected so that it doesn't get dirty or broken, but be sure to keep it close to your water drums so that you don't have to go looking for it when you need it. The barrels that I'm linking to below from Sam's Club actually come with a siphon hose and a hand pump, but if you're able to get recycled secondhand barrels, then you can just get one from Amazon. I'll leave a link for that too.
Now, not everybody has a garage or a basement to store large barrels like this. They can actually be stored outside as well. Now, someplace dark is best, so you want to keep them out of direct sunlight if you can, and you'll probably want to cover them up with a dark tarp. Once you clean and fill one of these big barrels, you can add about 2 tablespoons of unscented liquid bleach to the 55 gallons of water. And that's enough to make it last for many years without growing algae or bacteria and without making it taste funny.
The downside of barrels is that they're extremely heavy when they're full.
Like 480 pounds of heavy.
We actually put our barrels on a platform with casters so that we will be able to easily move them around in the garage when we need to get to the shelves behind them or anything. I ordered the platforms from Sam's Club as well.
Now, several years ago I made some rolling platforms for my mom's water barrels, and while they're stronger than these Sam's Club platforms, it actually cost more to buy the parts than it cost to just purchase the ones from Sam's Club.
Another thing to remember is that you won't be able to take these big water barrels with you if you have to evacuate. The barrels are best used to refill smaller containers after you've used up the water that's conveniently stored in those.
And water storage containers come in all shapes and sizes. You can get heavy-duty plastic bricks that hold several gallons of water. These tend to be better priced at Walmart or Sam's Club than at Amazon or some preparedness specialty store, but you can do your own research and find the size and shape that works for you. They come in all shapes, all sizes, all,
These stack up.
Yeah, there's all sorts of options.
We even have these 5-gallon boxes. They're cardboard boxes with a Mylar insert that's made to hold water. It makes it in a more shelfable size. They're not really stackable like the plastic bricks, but they fit on the shelf,
Fit on the shelf, that's 5 gallons of water, easy. Now, the benefit of these smaller containers, like 5 gallons or less, is that you can easily bring them into the house to actually use them.
Or into your car if you're evacuating.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about a few ways that you should not store your water. First, don't use milk-type jugs to store your water. Although you can buy distilled water in milk-type jugs, this type of plastic does not hold up over time. It'll start to seep water and it'll make a mess, and you won't be happy.
Second, don't store water in some recycled container that previously had anything you wouldn't normally consume. Don't use bleach bottles, don't use detergent bottles. Containers that held cleaning products aren't a good idea for water storage.
Number 3, don't store empty containers. I know it sounds silly, but we waited 2 years before we actually filled up these water barrels. My in-laws had empty water barrels in their basement for years before actually filling them up. We were actually the ones who filled them. They were waiting for those rolling platforms that Mike eventually built for them so that they could move them around and clean behind them and do that. So they just had them empty. You can't count containers as part of your water storage unless they actually have water in them.
And just one final warning, don't store gasoline or other chemicals near the plastic water storage containers, because the chemicals can actually leach through the plastic of the gasoline can and into the plastic of the water barrel.
Whatever methods you choose, start now. Don't make excuses. It doesn't have to cost anything. It can be as simple as not throwing away that empty 2-liter bottle or washing out the juice bottle and filling it with water. Don't be overwhelmed.
You don't need big barrels to get started. Emergency water for 3 days for a family of 4 is about 20 gallons. And that's easy and it doesn't take up a lot of room.
Water is essential for life, even more so than food. Now more than ever, we're seeing that we can't rely on anyone else to provide for us during an emergency. Do your future self a favor that could possibly save lives by getting water stored for your family now. You can do this.